hopefully some other folks will join us while we're in progress. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Mann. I'm a postdoc fellow at the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar entitled Thermal Aid, Managing Heat Stress in Cattle. Before we get started, I want to point out a couple of items real quick. And so to the right of the screen, there's a questionnaire to ask how you heard about this. If you haven't already done so, if you wouldn't mind filling that out. Also, during Dr. Spire's presentation, we'll have a couple of breaks, and we're going to ask you some questions. It'll be similar to the poll you see. Then at the end of the presentation, we'll have a couple of questions to also ask. During the presentation, there will be a couple of times when I change the screen, and so you'll see a flash. I'll demonstrate that real quick. So if you notice at the top of your screen, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Adobe Connect real quick, and then we'll get started. There's a little person with their hand raised, and so if you click on that, you can see the applause button. And so at the conclusion of the presentation, if we could all give Dr. Spires a round of applause, that would be great. And then at the bottom of the screen is the chat box, and at the conclusion of the presentation, we're going to field some questions. And so if you would take a moment and put your questions in there as we're going forward with the presentation, that'll be great, and then we'll get to your questions. I want to thank you again for participating today, and with that, I give you Dr. Spires, Professor of Environmental Physiology at the University of Missouri, and he's going to tell us more about thermal aid.
Thanks, John. For nearly 2 years now, a group of us at the University of Missouri, including faculty, staff, and students, have been working together to develop a smartphone app and a website that will help users to identify heat stress in livestock and to hopefully provide information on how to reduce that level of heat stress, with the ultimate goal being to establish a communication network in this area. The presentation that I'm going to do over the next little while is pretty much divided into 3 parts. The first part deals with the magnitude and the complexity of the problem. What is the problem of heat stress? What are the things that we're trying to deal with? The second part of the presentation will be a walkthrough of the app with screenshots and information on the website, ThermalNet, that accompanies the app. And then the third part will be our future plans that deal with the complexities and the challenges that we have to deal with in trying to look into the future of working with the app. So the first question is, what's the problem? What is the problem with heat stress as we know it? We know that heat stress has a major impact on almost all sorts of animals, from the standpoint of the animal's health and the welfare of that animal, and how it affects the productivity and the comfort of their animal is also of much importance when trying to look at the effect of heat stress. In the issue, when we start looking at the scenarios associated with livestock, it becomes even more critical. We can go from situations such as confined dairy to grazing pastures to feedlot situations. All of these have unique issues that we have to deal with when we start to think about heat stress. The additional challenge is how to define stress in general. Specifically, in this case, how to define heat stress or thermal stress. As you can see here on a diagram that was created by Leroy Hahn some years ago, he did a really good job of identifying what the stress is, how we go from a non-stress normal level to a stressful area that will impair the function of that animal. And on this nice diagram, he was able to point out certain critical things that will affect what will determine what will become stress or non-stress, and such things as the intensity of that stimulus, the duration of the condition, and the ability to recover from that. We know a lot today that possibly things like nighttime cooling is even more important than the daytime heat stress in determining how that animal is going to deal with that heat stress in the long run. Things that will determine the threshold is the conditioning of the animal. How much have they been exposed to heat already? Is it early in the summer? Is it late in the summer? Have they actually adapted to this sort of thing? The nutrition of the animal, whether they're old animals or they're a young animal. And then the genetics, of course, of those animals, whether they're a heat-tolerant animal or not. About 10 years ago, St. Pierre came out with an estimate of the annual cost of heat stress to dairy, beef, and swine. And what he showed from this is that it totals more than $1 billion annually. Now this was done during a normal year, normal level of heat stress, when we didn't have the conditions that we have a lot of the times today. And he also didn't account for some of the long-term problems, such as the effect of heat stress on reproduction and health of the animal. Studies have been done to look at the change in the temperature of the Earth over time, and we know that the temperature of the Earth is increasing slightly over time. The cause, we don't know the reason for the cause, but we do know that it's starting to rise, and it's been rising since about 1900. We also know that over the last 2 years, we've had some major issues with heat stress in much of the United States. This is a chart from 2011, the summer of 2011, showing just where the hot spots were for heat stress down in the Texas area, down in the southern part of the United States. In 2012, we had the same thing, but more so in the Midwest, where we had lots of heat and lots of drought. We also know, what's fairly certain, is that the incidence of temperature extremes is increasing. In other words, the number of high temperatures, the number of low temperatures is increasing, and it's been increasing since about 1970. What this means is that animals are going to be experiencing rapid high temperatures and rapid low temperatures, and simply don't have the time that they need to adapt to those conditions. What we show on this page further complicates the problem. This is a set of data that we collected in my lab back in 2002. On the top graph, we see the body temperatures of a bunch of animals, beef cattle, on pasture during the summer, and daily records for these animals in different regions of the body. And on the bottom, we have ambient temperature. The ambient temperature is in Celsius. I could translate that for you by saying that the high point on that curve is about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So what we see from this is that the temperature of the body of the animal goes up and down all the time between night and day, and as we go through temperature extremes. So the question then is, how do producers deal with these situations? How do they make any sort of assessment of the level of stress? And then more importantly, how in the world do they determine how to deal with this level of strain on the animal? We know that there have been indices of stress that have been produced for livestock for probably the last 50 years. Primarily, they create something known as the temperature humidity index that uses a combination of air temperature and humidity to come up with an index of stress. This has been done for swine, for chickens, for dairy cows, and beef cattle as well. And this has been around for a very, very long period of time. The more traditional graph or table that we show is one like this for livestock, where we have air temperature over on the side and relative humidity on the top of this, and down below in the table we have the indexes, the temperature humidity indexes. What this does is it allows us to put the animals into 4 different categories. We have normal, which is anything below 74 on the THI chart. Alert, which is 75 to 78, danger 79 to 83, and emergency anything above 84. Obviously, the things that you need to do for the animals changes dramatically as you go from one level to the next. So like I said, this has been around for a long time, 50 years at least. And the problem is that producers simply do not use this chart. Okay, it's out there, but think about how they would have to use it. They would have to have the chart available to them in the field or back at home. They would have to do the calculation. And then on top of that, they were going to have to figure out how to deal with the stress that they've identified. Have to go to the literature or talk to an extension agent or something like that. So the question still remains, what do producers do? How do they deal with this heat stress? We decided about a year and a half ago that what we needed to make was a decision-making tool that would allow the producers to identify the level of heat stress and how to reduce that level of strain on the livestock. I should say that my colleague Bob Weber, who's now at Kansas State University, was the individual who gave me this idea that we then took and ran with to develop it into the app that you'll see today. The bigger question is, what do the producers need to know on a handheld device? What is enough information and what is too much information that allows them, while they're standing out there in the field, that allows them to make some sort of decisions on what is happening in front of them? So that comes around to the idea of building an app. Well, first of all, I can tell you that building an app is not easy, especially for somebody who has had no experience in building an app. One of the first things you have to do is figure out where you can find somebody who knows how to create code that is needed to actually construct that app. That's a hard problem. So we did that. We went out and found somebody, and we've actually found a group of students through a course that would help us do this. One of the first things that we determined was that we needed input from the people that were actually working with the heat. Also, we needed input from young people, such as students, on what this app was going to look like, what they thought should be needed, and what the producers think that they should need. And so we incorporate that information. We talked to students, we talked to producers to bring all that information together to construct this app called Thermal Aid. We know we had to involve the students. We knew we couldn't involve researchers too much. That was important to have researchers in it, but they tend to get carried away and not necessarily create something that's going to be useful to the producers in the long run. So one of the first groups that we worked with was a group of undergraduate students in animal science that had taken a class of mine dealing with animal stress. And so they kind of had an idea about what to look for when we're talking about heat stress and that sort of thing, and what maybe producers might need to know. We also worked with a class of journalism students and computer science students that would actually help to build that app. And this group, the animal science students, the journalism students, and the computer science students, worked together weekly to come up with the app that we're going to show you today. We also took the app to students in science projects. We had a science boot camp this last summer where we showed them a prototype of the app. This was to high school students, and we got feedback there. And we also took it to the state fair, all in an attempt to try and come up with something that producers would actually use. John, I think this comes to about the first intermission, where we've explained the heat stress issue, and after this we'll talk more about what the app actually looks like.
Okay, well, I'm going to pop up a couple of questions real quick just for the audience. These are just for fun, but if you wouldn't mind taking a second and looking at those and see if you can see what you think. Just take about 20 more seconds. Well, according to my cheat sheet, the answer to question number 1 was dairy. It was $900 million, and the answer to question number 2 was greater than 90. So I'm going to hide these. And
very good. Well, obviously we need more work.
Okay, go ahead, Dr. Spires.
Okay, so now we're into the second part of this presentation where we actually start to talk about what the app looks like. Now, I should say the app is not out there yet on the market. We hope to have it out within the month. Within the next 4 weeks, we hope to have it out there on the market. We're going to issue this, and we're calling this sort of Thermal Aid Lite, as a 99-cent app. And I'll explain to you the difference between Thermal Aid Lite and Thermal Aid Pro in just a little bit. Basically, what we're going to present is phase 1 of what we hope to accomplish in the long run. If you go out there and you download the app, you'll see you won't see this screen here just yet. This screen actually shows you the components of the app that we hope to create in the world actually out there. We have inputs from the environment to the tune of temperature and humidity. We have animal input that's going to go in this, and I will explain to you later what that's all about. Then we have the producer connection. The producer sees this information, can then take the suggestions that we offer via the app and work with the animals to adjust the animal situation. But there's also the researcher component. The producer can interact with the researcher to come up actually with other ways of dealing with the stress. What we're hoping to do, again, is create this network where there is more communication between producers and researchers with what is going on specific sites, on specific farms. And so there are 4 components to this whole process. When you download the app, you're going to see this icon that's shown here as Thermal Aid. When you open that up, you're going to come to the very first page. The initial page shows you, first of all, information on the app. If you click to About, it'll give you the information on that app. If you click on Homepage, you'll actually be directed to the website where you'll get additional information, more detailed information on heat stress and how to relieve that heat stress. Also shown on this page, you see at the top this thing called Your Animal. After you start entering animal numbers, you'll see actually a listing of those animals. You can give them names, you can give them numbers, and you'll see that listing. You'll then be able to, in the future, to go in and click on that animal to get the history of what that animal's been doing, all the information on how that animal's been responding to different conditions, different days of the week, different days of the month, and you'll be able to get that information. The next site that comes up, the next page that comes up, is the one you see here. And this page, it requires a bit more explanation than the one that went before. So let me start going through. The top of this has animals at the top. That will direct you back to that first page. So it will give you the animal numbers, and you can then go to those animals and find out information. Over on the right, you see, and John, let me click on the pointer here. Let's see, where is pointer? Over on the right, you see tips. So you actually can bypass everything below here and go to the tips page and get information on what to do under that particular situation. Where your animal appears will be the animal number once you start entering animal numbers into the app. Down below, we have even more important information. What you see here in large white numbers is the actual temperature at that particular point in time in Fahrenheit. Okay. Here on the side, you see the low temperature for that day. This is the temperature of that particular hour where you clicked in. This is the low point of the day, and the high point will actually be this temperature that would be appearing over here at that point in time. If you're doing this later in the day, you would have a different high that would register. I should say that this information is coming in from a weather website. So this is available anywhere in the United States. Weather will come in and give you this information directly. Then what happens is that information is taken, humidity and the air temperature is taken to calculate the temperature humidity index for that animal. And that's what appears inside the animal picture that you see here. The animal picture will change color depending on the level of heat stress that is calculated, going from a neutral temperature, like you see here, of green, all the way up to a red temperature that would be a major level of heat stress for that animal. If you come down here to the bottom, we have beef categories and dairy categories. That lets you now select the different conditions for those animals. More importantly, you come down and you click on the info button, and this is what you come up with. Here you have the spot where you can add the animal's number or name if you wish, and you can enter a zip code, a different zip code from the one from the site where you're located. I should say that the site where you're located, you hopefully will have GPS input that's going to come in and give you the weather for that particular site. That happens automatically. However, if you want to put in a zip code for somewhere else in the United States and get the weather for that area and calculate how that's affecting your animals there, you can put in a new zip code for that area, okay? And then you can go back and go through all the things again that's related to this site. As you go through an animal and collect more and more information on that animal, you will see information stored down below here that will appear, and we'll show you that later on as we go through this app. So say you go back now to the page that we had before, and we begin by selecting information on an animal. In this case, what we're going to do as an illustration is select dairy and see what fields there are for you to check off. You have dairy for this animal. So now say the animal is number 342 at the top. And John, I keep forgetting to pick my pointer here to move around. Let's see if I can gather it here. Oh my goodness. Let's see. Well, oh, there it is. Got it. For this animal 342, it's a dairy animal, and the current temperature is 51 degrees Fahrenheit. The low for that day has been 40. Okay. We see that the temperature humidity index now is 53 for that animal. We then have the choice of whether that animal is freestall or grazing. If we click on one of those, the next one showed that the animal was freestall, and again the temperature is the same, the low is the same, and in this case the newly calculated temperature humidity index has not changed for that animal. We now click on whether it's high producing or low producing. We picked high producing, and so as a result we change the index now is changing for a high producing animal. I should say that we're using indexes that have already been published in the literature to calculate these values for the general dairy cow and for the general beef animal. And so it changes for a high-producing animal to this level. It's still within a normal range. The animal is still green. If it was a summer, this is just 51 degrees, and so if it was summer conditions, we might now go into an orange condition or into a red condition that would be more of an alert type of situation. We now have the choice of whether we want to go with healthy or sick. If we pick sick, I can tell you that it's going to go to another level. We don't have the time to go through all of that at this point. What I want to do is flip back and say that we can make the same choices for beef animals. So here we have at the top animal number 145. It's a beef animal. It was in a feedlot. The number of days on feed, greater than 100 or less, and whether this animal is sick or not. And again, it will change, and the temperature humidity index will reflect for that beef animal what the level of stress is for that animal. Now we can also go forward in time to see what the conditions are going to be tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. So here we have our site again. If we click on, and we have the low point for that particular day for animal 206, the high point, the temperature humidity index. If we click forward in time, we get something like this. Here we have Friday now. Here we have Saturday. If we continue to click forward, and we can see that we're going, here we have the temperatures, projected temperatures for Friday, high and low, low and high on this, and then we click on Saturday. Again, the low temperature, the high temperature, and you can see that the temperature humidity index has changed because the temperature has gone up for that day. We go to the next day, Sunday. Again, the temperature has gone up again. Temperature humidity index has changed. Now it's cooled off on Monday, as we see over here, for Monday, and now the temperature humidity index has gone down for the same animal. So now we're knowing if a heat wave is coming, we know that's happening. We know what level of stress that animal is going to be exposed to as we go through Tuesday and Wednesday of that next week. Again, using weather information that is already out there on the internet. We can come back now to our site again, and if we click on this plus button, we can actually, see down here at the bottom, we can actually override the automated temperature entry and put in our own temperatures. Here we have the site here, and if we come down to the bottom, we have temperature humidity down here. If we click on temperature humidity, we come to this page where we can enter our own temperature, our own humidity. So say you don't have Wi-Fi connection, or you don't, for whatever reason, you don't have information coming in through your phone, but you have some way of recording temperature, you have some way of recording humidity. You can enter those values, or you can put in projections of your own. You can say what temperature might cause me to shift that animal to an extreme condition. You can do that through this site. At the end, you hit done, and it takes you to this page where you can see now for this particular animal. Again, you would have the name at the top, the zip code here. The information is displayed for that animal as you go through this. So here we have, let me just point out with my, I keep forgetting, John, to pick that arrow. Here we have temperature humidity index that was done on 2/6/2013. These are just false values that we enter just to show you something. We have a yellow color. Here we have down here breaths per minute, which I'll talk to you about in just a little bit. A green color, which is no stress. This is a little bit higher stress. This is a really high stress for this animal. And you can see where, under what conditions did you have stress for these animals and what conditions did you not have stress. More importantly, you can click on each one of these and it will take you to a page that tells you what to do with that animal under those stress conditions. So if you clicked on if you didn't identify, let me just go back a minute. If you didn't identify one of these and instead you just clicked forward in time on this, you would get this page of tips. Here you have now just the general tips: beef and dairy, pasture, feedlot, grazing, freestall. If you click on these, you go to a whole page now of various tips for no stress condition. And like I said, if you had a specific condition already identified, it would take you to this automatically. But here we have no stress, we have alert conditions, we have then go forward in time, danger, and emergency conditions. These are just a part of the page. We wanted to keep it short because, again, we're trying to put on here the conditions, the things that need to be done under those conditions that you just need to know immediately. Again, on the website, we have much more information that goes along with this. You can also now go back to the original page, and now we've entered some animal numbers for you. And you can add more animal numbers, again, like we showed before, or you can actually delete animals if you wish. And then we also have a component for measuring respiration rate. Now the question is, why do I want to measure respiration rate? Well, everything that I've shown you up to this point really applies to the entire herd. It is just what the herd is going to be experiencing. Yes, you can put different animals in, but those animals in that herd most of the time are going to be experiencing the same conditions. We actually needed some way to get individual animal measurements as well from this. Respiration rate is a very good thing to measure. It's manual, but it's a very good thing to measure because you don't have to touch the animal. It is closely related to body temperature, and it determines the immediate response of that animal to heat stress. Here we have a graph that we collected used some of our data on, showing the relationship between respiration rate and body temperature. And as you can see, it's pretty linear. As we go up in time, we get an increase in body temperature. And by the way, John, with that question on the respiration rate, you can see here we have pretty much normal body temperature here. When body temperature starts to increase is when the respiration rate starts to go above 90 or 80 or 90 on this chart. So we come back to this page now where we have this neat little button that's a red button in the middle that allows you can push that button and it starts a timer. You can then look at your animal and count the flank movements on that animal for any number that you want. It doesn't make any difference if it's 3 movements, if it's 10, 15, whatever. And eventually you come to a page where you enter the number of breaths. You stop the timer and you enter the number of breaths. You enter that and then you hit OK. And what it does then, it will calculate for you the breaths per minute that I showed you on a previous slide. This allows you to identify heat-sensitive animals and heat-tolerant animals, and that information is sent then to a database that you can then pull up later along with the ambient conditions to tell you which animal was hottest under those conditions to allow you to separate them out into heat-tolerant, heat-sensitive animals. All that information, like I said, can then be viewed later. More importantly, we have a YouTube video that we're creating at this point in time that will be issued at the same time that we're going to issue the app to explain all that I've been going through. We realize that this is complicated and we need to have some explanation to the user on how to do this. Plus the webinar like we're doing today and other webinars that we're hoping to have in the future to go through and explain this to the user, to livestock specialists, as well as the producers that are out there in the field. We also have this website called ThermalNet that is out there now, and we're making modifications to expand upon that as we speak. Just to show you some of the screenshots, here's one of the opening shots. As you can see, we can look at issues related to heat stress strategies, information on the app, livestock and heat, climate and weather, information that's sort of a testing spot for students if they want to be tested on what is heat stress. And then we have a category known as Ask the Expert. Raising tips for dairy, recognizing heat stress, and this is where you could actually write in questions to us that we can then respond to at any particular point in time. So in the end, we have this situation where we have used students and producers to create Thermal Aid and ThermalNet that comes together to give you what we think is a pretty good tool, at least for starters, to deal with heat stress that is out there in the environment. John, I think it's time for the next intermission.
Okay. Well, I'm going to pop a couple questions up here real quick. And again, these are just for fun. If you would take a moment and see what you think. Any other takers? All right. Give it about 10 more seconds. Okay, let me hide these questions. And back to you, Dr. Spires.
Okay, we're ready. So what I've done so far is to explain to you the app that we're going to issue, like I said, in about a month out there for the public to use. It'll be a 99-cent app, so relatively inexpensive, that the people can use and that we can work with them, hopefully, on gathering information and that type of thing, and improving ultimately the communication between us, the people that work in this field, and the people that need that information. We're already starting to think about what to do for the future. We know that there are things associated with the app as it currently stands that are issues. It's not the perfect app by any means. It's only the first phase of this. So we're already thinking about the next phase, which we call Thermal Aid Pro. There are many challenges in trying to identify the heat stress that's out there. As I said before, the temperature humidity index that we're using out there is one that's a very general one. It does not take into account such things as adaptation, the variation between animals, the reliability of various responses, breed differences, differences in age, growth differences, whether they're fast-growing animals or slow-growing animals. It does not take into account really the heat, the immune status of the animal, and ultimately the profit that the producer might gain from using something like this. There are many indices out there for heat stress. As I indicated earlier, there are indices that are much more complicated that have been issued recently, dealing with that incorporate wind speed into the temperature and the humidity, solar radiation, black globe temperature, things like that, that would make this much more complicated and require the user to measure many, many more things. And we've tried to shy away from some of that. So what are the long-term goals for our system? Well, basically, what we're trying to do, as I said before, is to establish a viable network between producers and researchers. What we would like to do is gather databases on field data, animal and ambient conditions, environmental conditions, that would allow us to make even better predictions in the future, to generate new equations that could be incorporated into future versions of this app. Situations like we have here at the University of Missouri, we have Horizon Point that's run at the university that takes weather information in for crop producers and gives them feedback back on how specifically to deal with their crops given the temperature extremes that are coming or into the distant future. The whole goal being to develop more realistic models that can address more complicated scenarios such as heat adaptation, breed, and age differences. So what we have basically is the ambient conditions and the animal conditions going into this network that then ultimately will feed to us. And again, I should say that the data that they're collecting, that the producer is collecting, with their permission, we will access that, but we'll only do that with their permission. Well, then we can take that information and communicate with the producers to improve this whole scenario in the future, and using thermal aid to do that. The big challenge that we realized early on is getting useful weather information to the producer, to the user of this app. As I indicated before, the Thermal Aid app that we're going to be putting out there is the best case scenario for the current situation. We're putting weather data in from a weather site. Okay, we understand that weather data, the temperature and the humidity out there in the field, is not necessarily what is in the barn or what the animal is experiencing in that feedlot, and that's an issue. It gives you a better idea about what to expect, but it's not necessarily the real world information. We also want to get information. We want to be able to use this in other parts of the world, in other parts of the country, maybe where there isn't internet or Wi-Fi availability. So this is something that we're trying to work on to get the information in on situations like confined dairy or feedlot situations. So what we're planning on doing is creating modules for temperature and humidity. That's an easy solution, actually. Small, cost-effective modules that the user can purchase and then place in different parts of their farm, be it in buildings, be it in feedlots, and wherever, and through wireless transmission send information to a smartphone. It would be the Thermal Aid app again that would give them information specifically on their site, not using weather information from the locality that they are situated in. We know that to do this, we've got to work with a company. We've got to work with a company that can build the devices that we're talking about. We've been in contact with a company called HQ Inc. out of Florida. They visited with us, we visited with them, and they feel like they have a long history of building thermal devices. They feel like they could construct something that would be cost effective for the producer, inexpensive, it has to be inexpensive, and that could transmit temperature and humidity a distance to the app and make this a much more effective application. To do that, we've got to get support. We've got to get grant funding. Hopefully we're going to get funding from sponsors that will contribute to this to help develop this more effective app in the long run. The next challenge is dealing with that ton of information that I pointed out earlier, and the fact that to get a lot of this information there has to be manual entry. We realize that entering respiration rate for many, many animals is not an ideal situation. You can pick out certain ones that you might want to check out, you know, high and low animals that may be giving you different conditions and you want to see what they're doing, but to get the whole herd will be a challenge. When you've got information like this, we still have a question about how are you going to deal with all of this information at once. So to do that, what we realize we have to do, and this is a more difficult challenge, is to develop temperature sensors for the animals. People have been developing temperature sensors for livestock for years, for decades. And some work well and some don't. We've used a lot of them in our lab. The problem with most of them is that they're expensive. They're going to cost the producer $50 to $100 a piece. These are transmitters that can be used over and over again, but they're too expensive. We know that. We know that we have to get a price that's going to be inexpensive for the producer to use, hopefully is reusable, and hopefully we can put in different spots on the animals where it can send a reliable temperature through wireless transmission to that smartphone. This is going to be more of a challenge for us in the long run. Again, we will work with this company HQ Inc. or any other company that might come along to develop these devices that will all eventually link into that app. So ultimately what we're trying to do is create a network of advisors from around the world. We have people in different parts of the world that are already interested in being a part of this and working with us, as well as in the United States, to essentially create extension in a smartphone. I think one of the first times that we see in this type of application where we are linking to the producer and to the researcher to bring them all the up-to-date information that we possibly can get. So in the end, we have our conclusions, showing you once again the network that we're hoping to create here, and then showing you with the help of sponsors and with grant support, showing you first of all that what we're developing is a smartphone app. It's been developed. Thermal aid will be out there in the very near future to give you immediate information on the ambient conditions, and then the ability to enter specific animal information for later retrieval that identifies specific animal situations where the one animal is heat stressed more than another, but also the ambient conditions and how that affects the herd. We have a website that will, the ThermalNet, that will connect to this, that also can be accessed individually, that will give you even more information on what to do with heat stress and how to relieve that. And also we provide a forum for information exchange. The additional challenge, the ones that I just pointed out, is being able to have worldwide weather input from all over the US, from all over the world, using modules for temperature and humidity that can be located wherever we want. This is an easy solution, but then also to have an app that is fully developed for automated data entry on the animal, and being able to retrieve that information is going to be even more important. Ultimately, what we're creating are teams that are going to be assembled to gather that information and provide feedback to the user, with the app, the Thermal Aid app, being the central focus of that network. Thank you.
Fantastic. Quick, I'm going to pop up a question, just kind of some food for thought, something to think about for a moment. And while you're looking at this, be thinking about some other questions you might have. And if you'll put them, type them in down at the chat box.
John, do I just write in the answers down below?
You know what? We can just talk about the answers over. You know, we'll talk about them live.
Okay.
So
very good.
So we've got one question right now, and it's from Todd. And he's asking about the application being species specific, and he's a shepherd who would like to know if the app can be used for sheep as well.
Right. Todd, this is something also that we've thought about from the very beginning. As we go out and we talk to potential users out there, we find that there are many other uses that people want for this type of application. For example, we've been interested in working with goats as well as with sheep, and also with pets. When we went to the state fair, a lot of the feedback that we got from people that wanted to know whether we had something like this available for their dogs to identify heat stress. The answer is, at this point in time, it's beef and dairy, because those were what we had the greatest access to. We can, yes, go out there using the equations that are out there. You saw way back at the very beginning that there is an equation for sheep, okay? But it's sheep in general. Just as for beef and dairy, these are general equations. And so we could develop an app that could be used. It would have a whole different equation that would go into this, but we could develop that for sheep and for goats and even for chickens in the long run, and put in those equations. However, the challenge comes that we don't have the specifics for, specific breeds of animals. So sheep vary a lot. okay? And whether they have a hair coat on them or not, that's going to change a lot also. So what we would have to do to make this entirely useful for you is to put in all those factors. And we simply don't have that data at this point. But that's something that we would like to do. Again, the idea, the approach that we've taken is to get the best app out there that we can using the current set of data that we have. And so like I said, we have that for sheep. Use that, start collecting the information, feed that back to us, and then we will generate, based on your particular herd, your particular conditions, what it might look like for your animals.
Okay, do we have some other questions? While you're thinking about your potential questions, and go ahead and put them in the chat box, I'm going to ask one of my own, and I want to go back to this this thing that you were doing with the students, because it seems kind of cool to me that let's say you've got a 16-year-old or 15-year-old that's working on the farm. He or she can use the iPhone to go out and check out the animals. What kind of feedback did you get from students as far as with the technology out in the field? Because that's kind of a new thing.
Right. Oh yeah, the students thought it was really cool. I mean, when we did the science boot camp, we actually took them to our farm here at the university and had them work with a prototype of the app. At that point, we had the respiration thing going and that type of thing, and they just thought that was really neat to be able to go and enter the, put in the information, measure breath rates, and put it in, and to be able to collect that information, but then have that come back to you, telling you what level of heat stress that animal was exposed to. So they really liked that. One of the things that we wanted to, John, at the very beginning, do with this app is to have also a tool that could possibly be used in education, especially in the ag ed field with high school students. Something that they could use, that they could develop science projects around, that they could work with this to look at just heat stress on their own particular farms at home. So yeah, the students really like the idea of having something that's pretty much high tech to play around with and to get something from it that actually makes some sense. One of the things that we focused on in that boot camp was the impact of climate, the impact of stress, and we think that this app is a nice avenue for getting into those important subjects that are out there today.
Fantastic. We've got a couple of questions. I'm going to get to these real quick. The first is, and this is a good technical question, is this app going to be available for the different kind of smartphone platforms, whether it be iPhone or the I just went brain dead. The other
Android.
Thank you. You can tell what brand of smartphone I have.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is it going to be available for other platforms?
It will be eventually. Yes. What we're doing, it's going to be issued first on iPhone, and that's simply because the app builder. By the way, I should tell you that the app builder's name is Titan Teagarden. He's a recently graduated student from the University of Missouri, and he's an expert in building apps. His area of expertise is in iPhone or in Apple systems. But we've just gotten funding from the university for him to take and also build an Android version of this. That's not going to be available in a month. That'll be available, some months down the road once he works on that. I should also say that all of this work wasn't done just by me. My research specialist, Peggy Ann Eichen, was a big part of this, and Brad Scharf, my postdoc, also contributed to this. Brad actually was the one who built the website that went along with this. So I had help on all of this, and Titan, the app builder, was also a great help on this. But yeah, it's going to be on iPhone, iPad type of scenario first, and that's simply because that's what he was more comfortable with building, and then we're going to go to Android, which he can build, but it's going to take a little bit longer to do that. But it will be available by hopefully within 6 months on both scenarios.
Let's jump to the next question that's on here, and I think it's maybe kind of similar to the sheep, but what about equine?
Yes, we definitely are thinking about that. That's another area that we want to go into. Again, we started this with getting something out there with the animals that we have the most access to, I guess. But equine would be really, really important. We realize that once we get people used to the livestock part of this, the beef and the dairy part of this, that we could branch out to equine eventually. And we have hopes of doing that, definitely. It won't be within the next 6 months, but hopefully within the next year or so.
Fantastic. Okay, Dr. Spires, to back up a little bit with the app being available, when is the kind of a timeline on when I can go to iTunes, do you think, and I can download this app?
Well, let me tell it to you from our standpoint. We're making some last-minute tweaks on it now. There's some things that we're wanting to correct. We're going to submit that hopefully next week to our university, and they will then, after they go through it takes about a week, they will submit it to Apple. Apple then has to review it, we're told, and that could take a week to 2 weeks. And so our estimate is about a month from now, okay? Definitely by the end of March, it should be available.
So should be ready to go for this actual warm season.
Yes, the summer heat. Exactly right.
Okay, do we have any other questions out there? Okay, here we go. Any plans to integrate this information into a Ration Formulation Software?
I hadn't thought about that before. That's good input. No, so the answer is no, not yet. But that's something that we would definitely consider. We're hoping that we can take this app and connect it to other systems that are out there. And so, if there's somebody out there that would be willing to work with us in on the issue of creating different rations and having that as a part of the feedback, that would be fantastic. So yeah, if this person S, if they would like to contact me, that would be fantastic, and we could work out something for the future, definitely. But we don't have that yet. It's not available yet.
Okay, our next question is from Todd. Okay, so he's asking that even though you don't have modules for other than cattle, can this information be used with caution and understanding of the species in question? So I guess what he's asking.
Getting back to the sheep.
Yeah, is there a way to kind of game this or adjust it a little bit with your own personal use to use it for different animals?
Like the sheep I was asking about earlier.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Todd, so if you remember back in the presentation, I showed that big screen showing the temperature on one side and humidity on the top for temperature humidity index. That is breaking it into the four categories, and those are specific for cattle, specifically dairy cows. But you can use that with sheep. Now I'm going to give you a disclaimer, that say that you can try it out and see how it works. In fact, I'd like to find out if you start using it how you thought it worked, and get some rough idea with caution, as you said, of what the heat stress is that these animals are going to be experiencing. You can definitely go into the future, like I showed you, about 7 days into the future, and see what the level of heat stress is going to be over the next week, and that will tell you, what's coming and what you might need to do to prepare, even for sheep or horses or any type of animal that is out there. That would definitely be applicable.
Okay, something I just thought about as you were answering that question, and I was thinking about the participation, because you were talking earlier about how you want to create this network. So how important is that going to be in the short run once people start getting the devices and actually using them? What are you expecting feedback wise and data generation wise?
John, we actually don't know. We hope that it will be large, that we'll have a lot of people responding. What we need, for starters, are a few groups that will be agreeable to allow us to see their information as they start collecting it. One of the things that we've just received new money from the University of Missouri to expand on this app, to create the Android version, but also to create a server at the university. We have a server that a portion of that will be dedicated to this app, where the information, again with the user's permission, will go to that server. They can then call this up later and they'll see the information for their own specific farm, and then if we can then go in and access that with the animal specifics, what are the animals that you're using, that's information that we would have to communicate with the users on, but then the conditions that come across to us as far as the respiration rates, as far as the just the level of stress that they're experiencing, that is information that we could then use to incorporate into this. At the beginning, we're hoping again that we would have a few responders, people that will start sending in their information, and as we then can tweak this model and make it better in time, we'll get even more responding. we can also have, we'll have the ability to just answer, not necessarily dealing with what comes across in the app, the temperature humidity index, but we can also answer questions just dealing with heat stress that might be coming and how to deal with that heat stress. We'll have availability here. I believe there's off the top of my head, I don't remember where it is, but there is spots where you can go to contact me, okay, and people that are working here with me to respond to questions along the way. But as far as the number, I hope it's not like a couple of hundred, because I don't know if we have the manpower to deal with a couple of hundred of users out there at one time. But hopefully over time that will increase, and we'll have the system set up to deal with that. Well, I should say that as we get into developing the larger system, the Thermal Aid Pro, what we're hoping to do is sell the modules and develop the some sort of income so that we can hire even more people to respond to questions and deal with the situations that are out there. But for the first version, the Thermal Aid Lite, I'm hoping that I'll be, along with my helpers, able to respond to the questions that are out there.
And what was the time frame on the more advanced version? I know you talked about funding and all that. But that is questionable, because what we will have to do, what we're looking to do, is apply for an SBIR grant and also look for potential sponsors that are out there over the next year. Okay, we get that funding in, and then we start developing the product. So we're talking about that potentially being a few years down the road. Okay. And the good thing about that is that it allows us to work out some of those kinks in it. One of the things that we're looking for, John, is to get feedback from users. This didn't work for them. That would be better. This is just the first version of this app. I would like to figure out a way to streamline it even more than it is now, to make it more usable, to give them something that they're actually going to use instead of just a toy that they're going to be playing around with. So that all will be modified. We'll be modifying that as we go through the next year. And so then by the time we have these other attachments, again, a year to two down the road, we will have a lot of this worked out, so hopefully they'll just plug right in to that app. Fantastic. Are there any other questions? Any last thoughts, Dr. Spires?
No. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to present something that this project that we've been working on for a while, and hope that people are able to go out there, patch in, download this thing, and start using it and giving us feedback.
Fantastic. Well, if you remember at the very beginning, I wanted to see if we could give Dr. Spires a round of applause. And so if you can see the little icon at the top, the little guy that looks like he's holding up his hand, and you click on that, scroll down a little bit, you should see the clapping hands pop up. And with that, we've got a couple of questionnaires here that we want to ask and of you, and if you'll take a moment to look at those. And also what I did down at the very corner, I've got some information about the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development, our next webinar, but I've also got my email, and I've got, more importantly, Dr. Spires' email down here. And so if other questions come up, I'll leave this page up for a little bit. And so you can, if you log off of this or click out of it, you can come back and revisit. And again, thank you everybody for your participation. And Dr. Spires, I really appreciate you.
Sure, no problem.
And your time to present this today. Thank you so much.
No problem.